Headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Is the question reasonable? What defines a transgender person?
I think all questions are reasonable, and I think it is perfectly fair and reasonable to challenge anything that anybody claims, especially when their claim is at odds with what you see with your own eyes.
And in terms of, we can talk about single-sex wards, but I guess the big one seems to be the toilets, doesn't it? Always comes back to the lavatories on this one. In terms of who is allowed to use them, is this a penis issue, to put it bluntly? Is that when people say, well, I don't mind somebody who's fully transitioned because they are therefore a woman, and I can understand that. They might, we argue about the biological elements of this, but I'll accept that somebody who's transitioned, that works for me, so that's fine, but anyone else not fine. Is that how you're seeing this debate unravel?
Well, first of all, it's not your toilets that are being claimed, not your toilets and changing rooms that are being claimed by men who are calling themselves women, who are deciding that they are embracing this idea that their own identity as a woman supersedes the fact that they that they are male, that they have a male body. I think that one of the issues here is that things have gone quite a long way down a very dark and very scary rabbit hole, in that we've reached a position whereby there were people who, there were men like me who claimed to be transsexual, who we were very, very small in number. And there was a process that we went through. We went through a process of counselling, of therapy, and this idea that we would come to understand ourselves more, make that decision, and go through a particular process. And being transsexual was essentially having gone through a process that involved surgery and hormones. We can talk another time as to the ethics behind that. We have, however, since around 2004, when Stonewall Stonewall ran out of money-making ideas and jumped on the bandwagon of trans, we've had through institutions been told, and institutions have been made to implement frameworks that are supposed to be to do with equality and diversity, which make any man who decides that he's a woman fungible with women, i.e. a man who suddenly decides he is a woman has this gender identity that he can claim, and this gender identity,
which is as valid as yours, which is ridiculous, right?
Well, personally, I don't believe in gender identity. I think the whole idea is based upon stereotypes and magical thinking. I don't think that we can be born with an idea of being male or female. And again, you said about questioning things. I think we should all question about what it actually means to be a man or to be a woman.
Yeah, and I think with this, I was just reminded of the one of many which you'll be familiar with, the Disney story. We're doing away with the terms ladies and gentlemen. Now, what I find peculiar about that is that doesn't equate to being kind to trans people, because trans people would be a lady or a gentleman. So it's obviously aimed at a completely different group altogether, which I assume are people who are gender neutral. And I can't help but think that number would be so tiny, Miranda, that it would seem extraordinary that we would eradicate the English language and spend multi-millions of pounds around the world altering signage all over the place to appease this one group that, well, frankly, there's huge question marks over what that even means. But surely that's the only group those decisions could be aimed at. Because it's not aimed at you, it's not aimed at me.
There's a whole other can of worms there. Even what does trans mean? A question that I used to enjoy asking on Twitter was, what is the difference between a trans woman who doesn't have surgery and doesn't take hormones and a man? What is that material, measurable difference between a man who claims to be a woman and does not go through any form of trans process?
Yeah.
What is the difference between that man and or between that trans person who claims to be trans and a man? And there is no difference. And the measurable material differences that we can measure between men who claim to be transgender and other men are, are often insignificant, and this is creating a huge problem.
This is it, isn't it? I mean, I think you've just identified precisely what the question when Joe, the caller, rang in. It's exactly this, isn't it? It's not about you or a trans man or any other trans woman. It's about this other area, this sort of bit in the middle, no pun intended, where there seems to be an identity war going on.
Yeah, and to some degree, this whole identity war thing, this whole idea of the non-binary and the 96 genders, I mean, there are a bunch of issues around that. First of all, it kind of distracts from dealing with there is an issue whether a transitioned trans woman should be using female spaces. Personally, I think that we should not. I think that if we are going to identify ourselves as or we are going to identify with women, I think that we owe them the decency to give them the courtesy of allowing them their own spaces and their own privacy away from males. The way that men are, we could admit that not all men are brought up in the same environment and not socialized the same. But what we can say is that the way that men are socialized and the way that women are socialized are very different.
Yep.
And that there are significant differences with the physicality and physiology with men that make them a risk to women. And I'm not saying that all trans women are a risk to women. I'm certainly not saying that all men are a risk to women. But when we're talking about sex-based violence, it's about men on women. The vast number of incidences of domestic violence and of sexual and other physical crime involve men as the perpetrator, and that their victims are often women. And I'm not denying that there is no such thing as men on men crime, but the impact of women on man crime is far less.
Yeah.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.